Also on my behalf, welcome next week. We're very proud that we could host this event, and we're very happy that you're all here today. We think we have a great program, and we started the program with the keynote speaker of this conference. I don't think Marcel needs much of an introduction, but I'm going to do anyway. He will tell us about quality of life, where it came from, and hopefully where we are going to with this quality of life. That's very nice because he published a lot about quality of life. And just a few weeks ago, he said that in his dissertation, he had one of the statements that quality of life should be abandoned as an expression, so he did not listen to himself. But we are going to listen to him today. Please give a big hand to Marcel.
Okay, thank you very much, Stein, for this kind introduction. Yeah, when the organizing committee asked me to give a keynote presentation, I thought, well, this might be a nice topic. I will retire next year, so that is a good moment to look back on your career and what you achieved and what recommendations I did in the early stage of my scientific work. Being naive and optimistic, assuming that people would listen. So there will be some accomplishments, some frustration, some, well, this is just like how it is. No disclosures. I would love to have many disclosures, but funding is always a problem. What I will do is I will talk about the concept of quality of life. The confusion between the concepts of health and quality of life, participation and life satisfaction. I will address quality of life after spinal cord injury. I will mainly talk about depressed mood and life satisfaction, so I will not go into participation or social support or all those important things. Psychological determinants of the quality of life after spinal cord injury. I will stay away from the topic of self-efficacy because Stein did a keynote on that topic in Dublin. I will not talk about appraisals because we gave a workshop on appraisals in Dublin. So I try to present some new information, and I will talk very briefly on the implementation of some of the results. So, quality of life and spinal cord injury. It's a relatively recent topic. When you do a PubMed search and you just type quality of life and spinal cord injury in the search screen, you get a total of a little more than 3,000 publications which have quality of life and spinal cord injury either in the title or the abstract or keywords, which is, I think, not a lot. Many people doing a systematic review would be happy to get not more than 3,000 results. So maybe that's something for any one of you who's looking for a topic for a study. Do a review on everything that has with non-quality of life. In 1997, when I defended my PhD thesis, a total of 19 articles on the topic were published, also not a lot. In 2023, it was about 300. So it has been multiplied about 15 times. But I also have to say, this is with any topic that you search for, you will always see this increase of publications in recent years. So it's not an exception. By the way, if you search for quality of life without spinal cord injury, you found about 100,000 publications. That's a challenge. Okay, so in the early days, only a few publications used the term. I was part of a consensus conference on quality of life issues after multiple trauma. in a conference in Germany, initiated by the government, because they wanted to begin a research and rehabilitation program on multiple trauma. And the conclusion of the spinal cord injury group at this conference was, only recently have we begun to carefully explore the effects of impairment, disability, and handicap. Here, ICIPH, the International Classification of Impairment, Disability, Handicap, on quality of life after spinal cord injury. We know very little about the relationship between rehabilitation outcomes or adjustment to disability and subjective well-being or quality of life, and much attention to this area is required. So at that moment of time, the field was really only just developing. Nevertheless, from the beginning, a huge terminology confusion has existed. And already in 1994, Hill and Feinstein wrote a very influential article in the JAMA. They did a review on quality of life publications, and their conclusion was that only 15% of the authors took the trouble to provide a definition of quality of life, how they define quality of life in their study. And their conclusion was the idea of quality of life has become a kind of an umbrella under which are placed many different indexes dealing with whatever the user wants to focus on. Just call it quality of life, it's an attractive label. And a little bit later, Taillefer et al. Talked about wild growth in the concept that resulted in the fact that everything imaginable can be considered to be part of quality of life, with the big problem that this will impair the quality of research and blur the exact implications of the results. And I will show you that there has been no change in that situation since then. Many definitions of health-related quality of life are around. Everything begun, I think, with the definition of the World Health Organization in their first statement that health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. And I think that the problem has begun with this definition and the word well-being in this definition. Because why didn't they say it's a state of complete physical, mental, social functioning, or physical, mental, social health? But the term well-being confuses what is quality of life, what is health-related quality of life. Another WHO definition later is much more specific. This is the definition underlying the WHO quality of life questionnaire. An individual's perception of his or her position in life in the context of the cultural and value systems in which he or she lives and in relation to goals, expectations, standards, concerns. So here, quality of life becomes something that is relative. What is good quality of life in one country or social group or culture can be different from another, and is by definition subjective, because it is dependent on what the individual aims to achieve in their life, or how they prefer to live. Another often cited definition, the degree of need and satisfaction with the physical, psychological, social activity, materialized structural area. And you see the same dimensions, physical, psychological, social, coming back again and again. But here also included living conditions and more structural things to consider. The health aspect, this is a definition to specify what is health-related quality of life as opposed to quality of life. The health aspect of quality of life that focuses on people's need of ability, daily functioning, ability to experience a fulfilling life. This is the definition that is currently on the website of the International Society for Quality of Life, ISOQOL. Subjective, it's a subjective and multidimensional concept. Physical occupational functioning, psychological states, social interactions, somatic sensations. And the final definition I want to present here, the value assigned to the duration of life. So here is the utility aspect, duration of life corrected by the level of quality of life, as modified by impairment, functional status, perception, and opportunities. Many people have proposed models of quality of life, and I will show you a few of the most common or influential. This one, Wilson and Cleary, published in 1995 already, so this is almost 30 years ago. Quality of life is a multidimensional concept with biological function leading to symptoms, leading to functional status, leading to general health perceptions, leading to overall quality of life. What you see is partly ICF, but it is also a very medical model, supposing one-directional relationships from biological function to, in the end, quality of life, but nevertheless, the mediation of the concepts in between. So functional status can be impaired, but is not directly related to overall quality of life, but the relation goes through general health perception. This has become very influential, and in fact, although you all know the ICF model with the bi-directional arrows everywhere, but when you look at the research, including my own research, everyone is assuming this direction of the relations. I don't see any publication in the spinal cord injury field studying the influence of quality of life on functional status. So we still assume there is a direction beginning from the disability and how it results in a reduced quality of life. Characteristics of the individual, mainly focused on things like age and gender, characteristics of the environment influence all levels of quality of life. Marcel Dijkers, his model has become very well known in spinal cord injury research, and this was also an attempt to classify all quality of life studies and measures. What is interesting is the distinction between the insider subjective view and the outsider objective view. At the top of the screen, well, maybe if you have the pointer, let's see if I start using it. Thank you. Yeah. So the outsider perspective is how society looks at people with health problems, disabilities, with the ultimate evaluation with health utility measures like the Eurocall, for example. When people complete the Eurocall, they indicate what their levels of problems with daily activities, problems with pain, problems with mood are. But the ultimate score is derived based on how the general public rates health of people with a certain health profile on the Eurocall. So it's not quality of life as perceived by the person, but quality of life as perceived by society. And then you see when you go through publications on the burden of disease, and you look at Eurocall scores of people with spinal cord injury, they are pretty low, because the general public thinks spinal cord injury is a very severe condition, much lower than when people with spinal cord injury rate their own quality of life. But this is the outsider perspective, The insider perspective is well-being, life satisfaction as the trade-off between how people function, what their level of achievement, performances are with respect to physical independence, health problems, whatever, but as a trade-off between how they function and how they would like to function. And it's important to remember that all life satisfaction ratings contain this trade-off between ambition and reality, and how the person experiences the distance between experience and ambition. This is the model I proposed in my PhD thesis, first published in 1999. What I wanted to do is make a connection between the ICF concept or its predecessor, International Classification of Impairment, Disability, Handicap, and the concept of quality of life. And what we thought would be useful to distinct, on the one hand, the level of functioning in the ICF, and on the other hand, a kind of more functional elements and more perceived symptoms elements. And well, overall, it looks a bit like ICF, but with this distinction. And the goal of the model at the time was, when you have a quality of life measure, look at the scales, look at the items, use the classification to see what aspects of quality of life are measured, and thereby have better knowledge on what is actually measured in the quality of life study at hand. We said, well, overall, the well-being is distinct, is not classified in the ICF, but important to consider as part of a overall quality of life model. Well, I said, well, when I wrote this up, I thought, well, everyone will start using it. Not so much. In preparing this presentation, I went to Google and I searched for quality of life model and images, and this is only the top of the page. So there is a plethora of quality of life models, much more fancy, colorful than what we did in the 90s. But nevertheless, all are different. Well, most of the time you will recognize physical, mental, social aspects, but there's a lot of variation in other aspects included in the model, whether or not it is a kind of a path type model or a descriptive model, etc. One new model that I think is interesting because it fits the trend on a focus on more positive outcomes, and it has become very influential as it is in the Netherlands. I'm not sure that, have you ever seen this model? No. It was published by Huber in 2011 as a kind of alternative for the negative focus on health. So this is a model of positive health with the dimensions of mental well-being, meaningfulness, quality of life, participation, daily functioning, and body functions. Many healthcare professionals are using this model to try to be more patient-friendly, more look at the patient as a whole, etc. But from a theoretical perspective, or from my perspective as someone who worked on these models of quality of life, it's actually terrible, because how can you consider quality of life to be an aspect of health instead of the reverse? Lots of concepts or items can as well be classified under another topic, etc. But this is, like I said, 1,500 citations in PubMed already, and still growing. So, in all, I don't think we need to have the illusion to get an overall general agreement on the definition of quality of life. This will never ever happen. The confusion will continue forever. Also, the suggestion I did in my PhD thesis, let's not use the term quality of life anymore. Let's talk about well-being or health or participation, whatever. No one will do that because it's a very handy label, umbrella concept. It's appealing. How can you be against quality of life of your patients? It's the best argument to get funding for a study that it will improve quality of life. But realize that it is not a very informative concept. And I think the only way to have conceptually clear definition is to say, well, to equalize quality of life and subjective well-being as the overall judgment of the individual. And with subjective quality of life, happiness, general well-being, overall life satisfaction, whatever you call it, there are subtle differences between the concepts, but it is more or less the same. Well, this is what WHO already proposed. In the list of definitions, the second WHO definition is exactly this, and I think this is how the field should move forward, but it will not happen. Okay, if you use the term quality of life, please, as an author, please specify what you mean. If you read a paper, a quality of life study, and don't make any inferences on the term, based on the term quality of life, but look what is measured in the study, what the measures are that are used, but also what are the items of the measures, because a certain name of the measure is only roughly indicative of what is included as items. Be aware, avoid as much as possible of overlap between concepts measured in the study. We still see studies on the association between mobility and health-related quality of life, and then health-related quality of life is measured with a SF36 total score, which include the domain of mobility, so no wonder that you get a positive association. Same for studies on depressed mood and health-related quality of life. Yes, all health-related quality of life measures have a domain on psychological health, so no wonder that there is a correlation. Try to avoid that type of confusion and overlap. And be aware, even using a conceptually clear measure, that different rating methods lead to different scores. Whether or not you rate frequency of certain feelings or behaviors, like is done in the patient health questionnaire, or independence in mobility, or the degree of problem with mobility and satisfaction about your level of mobility. Scores will be very different depending on the type of rating, which makes, of course, comparison between studies very difficult, which is unavoidable, but be aware of the problem. Okay, so much on the term quality of life after spinal cord injury. I will talk a little bit on recovery of quality of life, and then focus on life satisfaction and depressed mood. And this is a study most of you will have heard of, I suppose. Brickman, lottery winner, and accident victims. And the accident victims are people with paraplegia. What was the conclusion of the study?
That after a while, everyone's as happy as each other. Is that not? Yeah.
Yeah. At least that's the common knowledge of the study. I read the paper after my PhD, to be honest. And these are the results. What they did is, there were 3 groups. They interviewed winners of a lottery, large sums of money, a control group, general population, and people with paraplegia in inpatient rehabilitation. So it was still the early phase. And they asked them about their present level of happiness on a 1 to 6 point scale, how happy they were in the past, before the accident, before they won the lottery, and their expectation on how happy they would be in the future. And it's very interesting because there was a significant difference in level of happiness. And the accident victims, the people with paraplegia, had much lower life satisfaction compared to the winners of the lottery and the controls. This difference was not very large, but this difference on a 1 to 6 point scale was substantial. What is also interesting is that the accident victims rated their happiness in the past the highest, by far the highest. So higher than what we would expect, which is the same as we find in our study. The publication by Prof. is very clear about that. People with spinal cord injury overrate their level of happiness before the injury. And what is also interesting, that there were no differences in the expectation of future happiness. So the accident victims were very confident that they would become happier in the future. We don't know why, which is a pity, because many of them could have still the illusion that they would recover completely. But anyway, no difference. And the conclusion of the authors is that it should be noted that the paraplegic rating of present happiness is still above the midpoint of the scale, and that accident victims did not appear as nearly as unhappy as might have been expected. So lower than the other groups, but higher than was expected. An overrating, so something's happening in their mind. Some kind of response shift or psychological adaptation is already ongoing in the early phase of rehabilitation. And this type of studies, it's not the only one, and note that this is already 1978, so very long ago, has led to a lot of theories about the recovery of well-being. And there are, well, I've shown this slide in the past, but there are two main theories on subjective well-being. One is that happiness is a reflection of people's health and living conditions. So when it's expected that people with spinal cord injury will have lower well-being because of their condition, or the set point theory that happiness is a stable personality characteristics that is only temporarily changeable. And this one, and the Brickman study is always used as an example of this set point theory, which could be, but we don't know, because the results of the study could also suggest that it is something of both or something in between. Research has been done, genetic research, studying twins, happiness of twins, led to the conclusion that about 50% of happiness is genetic. You are lucky because your parents were happy, so you are more likely to be happy too. 10% is due to circumstances like having a spinal cord injury, and 40% is attributable to behavior. And this is, of course, what we as psychologists love to hear, that despite this large genetic component, well-being should be influential if you can influence behavior, adaptive behaviors. What would that be, that mechanism? Well, of course, there is this aspect of functional recovery. People can be happy because they survived the accident. People will become happier during rehabilitation because they regain function. So their disability in terms of consequences in daily life minimizes, and therefore they become more happy. And reintegration into society, taking up social roles that you had before the injury, will also lead to higher scores on quality of life ratings. And the other mechanism is response shift or psychological adaptation, or and there's a big difference between the two. But you all know probably response shift theory, that it is a difference in how people perceive their condition, their satisfaction with their condition, because of three mechanisms: recalibration, the change of internal standards. I thought I was tired before this radiotherapy, but after having had radiotherapy, I know what real fatigue is. So what I used to consider as severe fatigue is not severe at all. Change of priorities, very standards that people before an accident are focused on employment and making a career, and after the accident prioritize family values and social relationships. Reconceptualization, the change of domains that are important, or that new domains come in the equation, like spirituality, for example. And this is the picture I associate with this type of response shift, the Baron from Munchausen, who pulls himself out of the swamp by pulling on his hair. Okay. Early rehabilitation research, and I mean in the 1990s. It was largely focused on differences in quality of life between spinal cord injury and the population. So do people with spinal cord injury have elevated mood problems, more mood problems than the general population? Do they have lower life satisfaction or not? A slide from my PhD thesis, we compared 4 types of spinal cord injury with a general population sample, corrected for differences in age and gender and education, etc. We didn't find a significant difference in level of life satisfaction between spinal cord injury and controls. And when you distinguish between the type of spinal cord injury, only people with complete tetraplegia score lower. So impaired hand function makes a difference, but for the other, there were only very few differences. And there are 2 lines of research, and one is more general rehabilitation research, using life satisfaction as an outcome and functioning as a determinant. People were very busy proving that IDH inspired functioning activities, handicaps. It was not the condition as such, the direct aspect of spinal cord injury that was relevant for quality of life. And there is another research line, more psychological research, using mood measures, depression scales as an outcome, and focusing on psychological determinants. This type of research is also very old, but it struck me at the time, and it has been for a long time, that these were 2 different research perspectives with very little communication between. That changed, but I will come to that in a minute. Life satisfaction research, this was a well-known study by Marcel Post, published in 1999, focusing on the impact of impairment, disability, handicap on life satisfaction, measured with the satisfaction with life scale. Very important was that the model systems in America used Diener's life satisfaction scale as one of the outcome measures in their registry. So nearly all American research has been done with this scale. But try to sort out what is important as a determinant of quality of life, starting with characteristics like race and education, but also health issues, time after injury, level and completeness. So what you see, for example, is when you include the functional independence measure, independence in mobility and activities of daily living in the equation, the impact of level of the lesion and completeness of the lesion disappears. When you include handicap or participation scores in the equation, the influence of functional independence disappears. So this is a kind of evidence that this change that I showed in the Wilson and Creary model, that a condition influences quality of life through these steps of impairment. Steps of impairment, disability, handicap actually works, although the total amount of explained variance is rather low. And what you miss, well, I said this is the more general rehabilitation research. No psychological factors as determinants. And an article from my PhD thesis, we tried to do the same thing as what Marcel did, but in a structural equation model, a path model, trying to tease out what leads to what. Level and completeness of the lesion. We had a kind of subscore of the number of secondary health conditions. These were 3 domains of the sickness impact profile: physical functioning limitations, mental functioning limitations, social functioning limitations, and life satisfaction measured with the life satisfaction questionnaire. And we were able to show that again, chain, and there is no direct relationship between lesion characteristics and life satisfaction, but lesion characteristics influence life satisfaction through these functional domains. Age and marital status had an influence, education, income, etc. did not, and again, no psychological factors included. This is interesting. This is from the model systems registering mean scores of the satisfaction with life scale. This is the only registry with a really long follow-up, and these are life satisfaction scores over time, corrected for everything that is in the database, from age and depression and everything that you can imagine. So what you see is, because many people ask me, recovery of life satisfaction after injury, how long does it take? Is there a kind of a plateau after rehabilitation, after 1 year, after 5 years? Well, this shows that recovery of life satisfaction goes on for many, many years after spinal cord injury. So even after 20 years, still some improvement can be expected on average. And when you compare, this is 23.3, the average score. So when you compare that with other groups, it's quite comparable between people like you, the healthcare workers. College students have a little bit higher life satisfaction, frail older adults have very high life satisfaction, prison inmates much lower. But so overall, a pretty good prospect on the long term. What people started to do is longitudinal studies. And this is an example from our umbrella project published by Van Kopenhagen in 2009. We started to measure life satisfaction in the first weeks after admission to a rehabilitation center, first admission after spinal cord injury. After 3 months at discharge and 1 year post-discharge, we see an increase of life satisfaction already during rehabilitation. And that is the main drawback, by the way, of this American study, because the model systems, they start measuring life satisfaction at follow-up. So there are no data in that database on the early phase. There are some studies, but this is the first to look into inpatient rehabilitation. And there is a very strange discrepancy because psychologists always measure depressed mood during rehab. But it is very controversial to measure life satisfaction in first rehab. In this study, the research assistants were very reluctant, and we got a lot of complaints about how can you ask this question when people have a new spinal cord injury or in the rehab center. And that is true, but if something is a problem, avoiding to talk about it is not the solution. And if we can ask people about depressed mood, why not ask about life satisfaction? I think it is perfectly possible, but you have to explain it to patients. And a measure that we used a lot in our study is the true life satisfaction questionnaire. Questions, 2LS as we call it. It has just 2 questions. One on quality of life at the moment. How satisfied are you with the quality of life at the moment? And the comparative question. How is your quality of life compared to before the spinal cord injury? Is it worse, equal, or better? And this retrospective question, and there's a lot of discussion about it in the quality of life research and theorists, because it is susceptible to all types of responsive effects. But well, that is, I think, not a drawback, but the intention, because this is intended to trace psychological adaptation effects. And what we see is when we ask people, this is a community sample, members of the Dutch Patient Organization, about 250 people, and we ask them about their satisfaction with life as a whole at the moment. The largest group by far rates their life as satisfying, so positive ratings. And when you ask them a comparative question, then the majority say, well, it is worse compared to before injury. So people still experience the adverse consequences of spinal cord injury, but nevertheless rate their current life as satisfactory. So this is psychological adaptation in action, or the results of this psychological adaptation. And this measure, I think, is good to trace the process. This is from the dissertation by Christopher Leeuwen, and also results of the Umbrella project. We distincted several patterns of recovery of life satisfaction or of course of life satisfaction after spinal cord injury. And we found a group with consistent high scores, a recovery pattern, an intermediate group, a few patients, only 5 of the 200, so many, but important for the fit of the model, that reported deterioration of quality of life, and unfortunately a large group of people with consistent low life satisfaction scores. And what we did is we tried to tease out the answers on these 2 questions by pattern. And what you get is this. We have 3 groups, the low life satisfaction group, the recovery group, the high satisfaction group, with complete data. So the numbers are a little bit smaller than on the previous slide. But when we compare their answer on the life satisfaction, the life as a whole now, the high satisfaction group has consistent high scores, but shows the recovery group shows an increase of scores, and even the low life satisfaction group shows an increase of scores, but mainly at the long, so early and long term. Nevertheless, median from 2 to 4 a substantial increase. But when you compare that with this comparative question, you see a different pattern. The high satisfaction group, again, so 4 is about the same compared to before the injury. So at the long term, they show an increase. So medium score about a little bit better. The recovery group shows the same pattern. So this is this recovery of well-being theory. And the low life satisfaction group, despite a growth in rating with satisfaction now, still says, well, life is much worse compared to before. And I think this gives very interesting tools for psychological guidance of people, focusing, talking with people about the difference and how they change their scores over time. This is from the Selfsky study, Times dissertation. Again, the 2 or less scores over time. In this study, we wanted to focus on the early phase of rehabilitation. So we measured life satisfaction at admission after 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, as long as people were inpatient. At discharge, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and 4 years. You will see the same figure on Alina's poster. She is writing up the results. But what is important for me now is this increase from a little above 5 until 7. So there is a substantial improvement of life satisfaction over time. And then it becomes interesting when we look at the depression research. This is a famous study by Paul Kennedy and Rogers, 2000. They measured depressed mood with the Beck Depression Inventory. They administered the questionnaire in the initial week of rehabilitation and every 6 weeks, as long as people were in the center, and then post-discharge at 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. And so in contrast to our life satisfaction scores, you see here a dramatic increase of depression scores during rehabilitation. And after discharge, scores are a little bit lower than in the initial weeks. And this has raised a lot of discussion. What is this? Is this the effect that by this time, week 48, so people are already almost a year in inpatient rehab, and do people become more depressed when they are in rehab? Or is this the result of dropouts, that only the people with very long rehabilitation trajectories, meaning severe injuries, delayed rehabilitation because of secondary conditions, they are more depressed? Well, we don't know, but this is a striking study. Actually, Craig also did a longitudinal study on psychological morbidity after spinal cord injury. 3 measurement time points: initial, which is shortly after admission, at discharge, and 6 months post-discharge. And when you look at the percentage of people with major depression disorder, 10% at admission, a little bit lower, 8.6% at discharge, 40% 6 months post-discharge. So there is a little increase, but a worsening situation post-discharge. Post-traumatic stress disorder didn't happen very often. Anxiety disorder, 3.4 initial, 4.9 at discharge, so an increase again, 4.2. So in contrast with this rise of life satisfaction scores, we see stability relative stability of depression scores. Another study by Paul Kennedy, this is the European cohort, Magnus was part of it, Peter Ruder was part of it. It was a study in, I think, 4 countries with measures, 12 weeks, 1 year, 2 years post-injury. People recovered a lot in terms of functional independence, no significant change in anxiety or depression measured with the HATS, an increase in life satisfaction, strangely not in satisfaction with physical health, but there was an increase in psychological and social satisfaction. So again, stability in depressed mood. And a number of studies have been published trying to distinguish certain patterns of depressed mood with sophisticated statistical models. And you see overall the study by Bombardier shows differences that exist at the beginning, they persist over time. So within there is not an average change, the recovery deterioration pattern. The same with time already also did this, also found stable patterns. The study by Bonanno, which is also from this European cohort, they showed an increase in a small group and a decrease in a small group, but also the large majority is stable. And the study by Craig, a large group of stable scores and decreasing depression in a minority. But with this publication, when you look at the fit statistics of this longitudinal model, they should not have reported this 4-pattern result, but the 2-pattern results, and that was also stable. So this is a kind of teasing out the result that you want to hear. But in fact, overall, I think the conclusion is that also in this type of research, people don't show much change in mood after spinal cord injury, which is very strange, and the discrepancy is changed. But it reminds us that depressed mood and life satisfaction are 2 different things, and people experience this different. And this is data at discharge from our self-ski study. We see a strong correlation between the depression score of the HATS and the total score of the life satisfaction questions. We see that this part of the figure is empty, so the combination of many depression symptoms and high life satisfaction is absent. But there is not a big much emptiness at this part of the figure, and overall you see the huge variation in life satisfaction scores with people who have lower depression scores, and also the reverse. So people can be depressed and satisfied with life, or are depressed, or are not depressed but perceive a low quality of life. Okay, to summarize this part of the presentation, depressed mood and life satisfaction are strongly related but distinct concepts. Mean depressed mood scores appear to be relatively stable after onset of spinal cord injury, which raises a lot of questions that we need to address in future research. Why is this the case? Why don't people show improvement of mood during rehab? Well, in many of the studies you see a small improvement at discharge, but an immediate deterioration afterwards. Why is this the case? What are we doing as psychologists helping people? Can we tease out a group with high depression scores and follow them over time and trying to assess the effect of our interventions? Mean life satisfaction scores nevertheless increase after onset of injury. So this whole response shift psychological adaptation thing is much more applicable to life satisfaction compared to depressed mood. And it also concurs with studies that I didn't show, that when you compare correlations between injury characteristics, secondary conditions, functional status with quality of life, you find stronger correlations with quality of life than with mood. Mood is not influenced by severity of injury at all. Why? And what does it mean for our work as psychologists? Because maybe I'm not telling you to do how to do your job, but maybe this is an indication that life satisfaction is a much more better focus to focus your psychological guidance on. Although it also reminds us that if people are really depressed, they will not be open to any life satisfaction discussion or suggestion to enjoy life more. Yeah, and it is very difficult to explain this lack of responsive with respect to people. How am I doing time-wise?
7 minutes. 7.
Okay, well, I'm about halfway in my slides. So I will go through this very quickly. Yeah, a lot has been written about psychological predictors of quality of life. Crystal performed a review published in 2011. The take-home message of this overview is that we found consistent predictors, psychological factors that are consistently correlated with quality of life, either depressed mood or life satisfaction or happiness or whatever outcome was used in the study. And we have very inconsistent determinants when you not only report a significant correlation, but also look at how many correlations were tested that were not significant. Then you see that, for example, locus of control, out of the 50 correlations, only 2 were significant. Spirituality, very disappointing results. Personality, very disappointing results. Currently, Alina is redoing this review. When I signed up for this keynote, I had hoped to be able to present the results, but it takes a little bit more time. But Alina can do it at the next conference. Okay, and then I have a number of studies on this topic, longitudinal studies on psychological determinants and their association with either mood or life satisfaction, sense of coherence, perceived manageability from the DAPS, the appraisal of life events, pretty consistently associated with life satisfaction, less strong but also consistently associated with depressed mood, disappointing results on the COPE and the spinal cord lesion coping strategies questionnaire, especially with life satisfaction. Well, you can read it in package because you will get this presentation so you can read it afterwards. But there are a number of studies showing about the same. This is, I think, interesting because we try to find change in the psychological factors themselves. Usually we measure at admission and then try to predict life satisfaction or depressed mood at follow-up. But here we have 3 measurement time points for mental health, no change, self-efficacy, no change, mastery, no change, optimism, no change. Illness cognition, also no change. Strange, but I think this is important to do. What we measure at admission, how stable is it? Because we now have a study on personality characteristics. We administer the personality questionnaire at admission and after discharge, and then you see a change in scores. But I don't have time. Self-efficacy, is a strong predictor. This is a study combining people's spinal cord injury and stroke. We measured self-efficacy of both the patient and spouse at admission. And then you see a very strong association with anxiety, depression, family dysfunction, 6 months post-discharge. So it can be very informative to measure personal characteristics at admission. I will skip this one. This is interesting. A number of studies have been published trying to do this path analysis with psychological factors as a test of the well-known SCIAM model. So the personal resources, self-efficacy, person in life, appraisals, Fredwell challenge, coping with the ways of coping questionnaire, with the ultimate dependent variable life satisfaction, partly showing the validity of this, these SCIAM and other stress coping models, but also showing that the stronger path in the whole model is between purpose and life satisfaction. So this is not necessarily the chain of events. Same analysis with depressed symptoms as an outcome. And another path analysis just to show you that this type of research is going on and encouraged to do so in the future. Also, recent development, people are much more focusing on positive outcomes. So, perception of gayness, the following spinal cord injury, interesting publication by Paul. Okay, so I will leave it here for the presentation. I will skip the last part. But the challenges are quite similar to what I presented on quality of life and the conceptual confusion and the models. There is also a plethora of psychological concepts. We really don't know what the difference is between self-efficacy, self-esteem, self-reliance, self-control. When you look at the questionnaire, similar items are present in measures of different concepts. So we really need to look into the heterogeneity of concepts and measurements. There's a big issue on what is the chicken, what is the egg, specifically with concepts like resilience. Is resilience a personal factor? Is it an outcome? People show resilience or not? Appraisals. Is it an element in the chain of adaptation, or is it just an outcome? Coping strategy, acceptance as a coping strategy. Is that really coping, or is it a rating of an outcome? Coping is anyway very unspecific. What are you coping with? Etc. And this is for your book. Thank you very much.
I think we have time for one or two quick questions. Anyone have a question, Marcel? Then I do have one. You showed us a slide that quality of life is over time is increasing, and I was wondering, isn't that a normal thing that happens with all of us? Do you know of any general public longitudinal quality of life study? Because I can imagine that this will happen throughout all our lives.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Overall, there are aging studies on quality of life, and they generally show a decrease of quality of life.
Is it a study that's done with the elderly and then in the last part of their lives? Because I can imagine that, but how is it?
Yeah. Yeah, you cannot trace back from that. But,
No.
but when you start with a cohort of 70-year-olds and then follow them for 20, 30 years,
Yeah.
then there is a general decrease of life satisfaction in part because, well, health deteriorates.
Yeah.
People have to leave their homes, go to a nursing home, whatever. There's also a lot of research on the general population on the impact of certain important events. I always show that slide in my presentation, but then you can see, for example, that marriage is an event with an increase of happiness before the event, of happiness afterwards. Whereas divorce has the reverse pattern, although with low satisfaction after the event. Yeah, so overall, I think, and what you also see, and that's the problem of these longitudinal studies, what is the survival element in it? Because even when you do this fancy statistical modeling, people will drop out because they don't want to participate in the study anymore, or they die, or whatever. So what you see in how this affects results in higher scores in the survivors is also unclear. You try to correct it in the statistical model, but there's always an element.
Thank you very much, Marcel.
Okay.
Thank you very much.